There's one in every crowd, eh?
Well, welcome back. I'm doing something a little bit unusual. I'm going to anticipate Gary's second half is as good as his first half and congratulate him on a very, very stimulating, entertaining and quite different presentation, together with a great deal of graphs. I don't know if any of you watch Alan Kohler on the ABC, but he is mad on graphs as well, so we're in good company. The other thing is that I usually forget to do this, so I'm going to do it now. Gary, for your distance ed, your mug. And the third thing is just simply to indicate who we have next month. I'm distracted, you see. Next month, Robert Black. Most of us would know Robert from, again, over the years. Robert Black is he's a great cartoonist, does a lot of corporate work and so on. When we put this up, you'll be able to link to his website and have a look at his work. But he's going to link the way he uses FileMaker Pro in the work he does with his cartooning. And I'm not going to say any more than that, but it's going to marry the creative side of us with those who like databases and FileMaker Pro, which would include a number of people here. So it's going to be an innovative. Robert is innovative by his very nature, and he's going to, as I say, talk about FileMaker Pro and the way he uses that with his work in corporate work. He's done work for BHP and many other companies and so on, so it should be a very fascinating talk. Gary, thank you very much for part two.
Okay, thanks, Ian. One of my other jobs at the moment is curriculum writer for a group called ATSI. In Australia, we have 4 academies. We have the Academy of Social Sciences, we have the Academy of History, we have the Academy of Science, and we have the Academy of Australian Technological Scientists and Engineers. But that was considered to be too hard to say, so it's just the Academy of Technology and Engineering. 800 professionals. So it's a professional organisation. It has lobby offices in Canberra. They have the ear of anyone they like. And every major industry in Australia is represented in that 800. The former chair was Alan Finkel, who's recently become the chief scientist. In his role as the chair of ATSI, he was my immediate supervisor for the curriculum I'm about to show you. And to say that he is exacting does not get across the detail to which he insists things must be. Every little thing must be covered, because once it's let out in the wild, you can't get it back. So one of his other projects has been Cosmos, the magazine, and another one of his projects is a thing called Style, which is an online learning management system. Stella, which we forget what it's called all the time. I put it up there to remind me, but we don't use it very often. It's all about relevant engineering. And the STEM part of it, the science has done a lot, the maths has done a lot, but the technology is seen to be computers, not materials technology, which it is in Victoria. So if you go to Sydney, technology means computers. And anyone that saw the Sydney Grammar article in The Age a few weeks back saying they only need 4 computer rooms, that's it. Why waste our time? We know where that departing IT manager is on the spectrum. That person's since left that job, curiously. So I'm not sure how Sydney Grammar is going. But former alumni are Gonski and Turnbull. So it's a very interesting situation. In fact, Gonski and Turnbull were in the same year at Sydney Grammar. All right, so what is it? Well, it's about hands-on experiments, online activity, which includes research and recording. So they have to take stuff and measure it, and then tell other people about it. And the advantage of what we're talking about is that it's different wherever you are. So there is no answer. So we like these sorts of things. So really good projects that we like are ones that have the answer, it depends. You can't look it up on Google. There is no answer on Google. Well, there will be if you post it on a web page, and you can put your answer up there, and that will be the place that everyone on Google goes to get the answer. And it's amazing how motivating that is for students. A model turbine, what things can you change on it? So straight away they get number of blades, blade length, blade angle, which are the only variables you can have on a turbine. Pretty simple. But rather than give a worksheet on it, you say, go and play with it. Oh, there we go, if I'd remembered. Go and play with it, write a report. So it is a second-hand observation. First-hand observation is go out there and see a real one. Second-hand is go and look at a simulation which is programmed. So of course you're going to get the right answer, but what is the answer? So put it into words, describe what's happening. And of course, in a class of 20, you'll get 20 answers. Or you'll get 5 answers and 5 sets of copies. But one way or another, they're asked to explain what it is, not to be original. Very few people are original. So let's not be too unrealistic about these things. So we can visualise some data. So we've got these fans that we hand out. They're pretty heavy duty and they blow really well. The thing with a fan though is ask the question, where is the air the fastest? And most school-age people say, in the middle. But the engineers look at it and say, well, the bit in the middle is only just going around like that, the bit on the edge going around like that, so it's going to be faster, not in the middle. And so we can measure the airspeed and then plot it and then turn colours. So across the bottom is a colour code, so red is fast and blue is slow, and there you find at the top it's the fastest because there's a bench effect. The air can't feed in fast enough at the bottom because the table's in the way. You actually need it on a pedestal. What a good design feature, putting a fan on a pedestal. Someone must have known something. And so at the top is the fastest, the blue is still hardly moving, and you notice the blue in the middle, which is quite clever, which then explains why if you put a balloon or something there on a soft fan, it actually goes back in to the void that's in the middle there. And of course that's in 3D. That's looking at height and length. Well, of course you can look at forwards and backwards as well. So you can do a 3D model. And so we can have little arrows at each data point. So there's one quadrant, and in Mathematica you can grab that and turn it and zoom into it and be in the middle of it and find out where the fastest bit is. And in fact there's a corkscrew red there. So the blade actually points off to an angle of 5 degrees and there's a corkscrew going through there. So we then put a barometer at a distance from the fan, and you could measure the pulsing of the helical fast air coming 10 metres away. You couldn't feel it, you couldn't hear it. If you turn your ear to it, you can just feel the pressure there. So then we've said, well, our colleagues in Ballarat that have got the Earth Ed Centre at Mount Clear, they've got a full set of these things. How about you take the barometer and go out to the wind farm up the road, and instead of using the microphone to measure sound coming off the blades, off the turbine, use a barometer. And sure enough, they've got the pulsing of the turbine, and it extends 10 kilometres from the blade. But it's not sound, it's an air pressure. Now, what's the difference between air pressure and sound? Well, then you get into some pretty fuzzy acoustic physics arguments, but your ear will feel it. So they're not hearing sound, but they're feeling pressure change. And it's like someone going like that all the time, and it would drive you nuts. So this is some Year 10 students who've gone to a wind farm outside of Ballarat and they've used a barometer and not a microphone, and they've discovered this. And funny, no one else on the planet has published anything to do with it. It's not quite wind turbine syndrome, but maybe it is. There's a way to stop it. Anyway, if you know what it is, you can engineer around it. Over at Strathmore, end of Bell Street and Tullamarine Freeway, squeezed in that little corner. It was a wonderful wide open playing fields wasteland before people decided to put freeways on creeklands and trainlands on anyway. So they're getting squeezed, but they've got this magnificent building there called the Space Education Centre, and it's actually world class. People from all over, NASA, ESA in Europe, come out to visit this place. Real astronaut people come and visit here because of the things they're doing. And one of the things they've got is a tunnel that Swinburne Uni built. The students built it. They've since built a better one. So they gave this one to the high school kids. And so you can do some clever things with it. And so one of the attractions of having an iPhone or an iPad is you've got a really good slow motion camera. And so you can actually put a dot on one blade and just count the number of times it goes around. And so you can work out how fast it's going, which is pretty handy, without getting too complicated. And so inside these little black enclosures is just a little electric motor running backwards. And if you know anything about electricity, you can run a motor forwards and use electricity to generate motion, or you can move the thing and it generates electricity, so it becomes a generator. So it's just in reverse. So there's all sorts of how efficient is it? Well, not very, but how efficient is it, what number? And so the students head off and find out with all those variables. We then talk about solar energy. That's a simulation for here in Melbourne. So the way the mathematic is written is that whoever opens it, the IP address automatically tells you the location, and it just straight away gives you the pattern. So you don't have to do any calculations, equation of time, all that sort of stuff. It just does it. And for your location, that's what you will see at midday for the entire year. So if you go out and take a photo at midday, what's that, 20 times a year? So on the 1st, the 10th, the 20th, so it's 30 photos for the year, you'll get that pattern. It's called an analemma. The first time that was taken using a camera was in 1979, which is fairly recent. And then you find there's not many of them being taken. And now we've got so many cameras around the place, you say, well, go right ahead. Time lapse, field of view, time of day, all the variables, go out and record something that no one else has ever done at your location. So you're unique. If you do this, no one has done it for your place. So you can blow it, take it on with a good quality camera, so you can blow it up and put it in the front hall of the school, be there forever.
Gary, that also gives speed, doesn't it? Because part of it, the doctor...
Yeah, it does. In fact, it tells you quite a lot. I'll go the other way. Not doing well with my left and right here today. Sorry about that. Okay. So everywhere is different. Everyone is different. So there's two loops. So one of them is the winter and one of them is summer. So the top of the loop there is our summer, December, and it's a big loop. So if you ever look at an analemma, you know if it's been taken in the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere. So the one that's usually published is the one taken at Greenwich, and it's got a little loop at the top. And from that you can actually work out the equinox. So the equinox is when it's 12 hours dark and light, and then our latitude, 37.4 degrees up and then 37 down, is how high the sun will go. So you can calculate all that. There's an app called Sunseeker written by the Bureau of Meteorology people in Melbourne. It's about $12. Well, it is $12, $12.99. You can point it, uses augmented reality, a little bit like Osmo. You can point it at something, it knows where you are and what angle you're pointing, and it will show you where the shadows go. So if you're putting in an extension or you want to get some sun on your backyard, you don't know where the tree's going to go, all those sorts of calculations, it will virtually show you where it goes. Spectacular. If you're building, want to put in a window and want to work out how far the sun will come into the room, it will tell you how high to make the window so that the sun will come in at a certain angle. So it's quite spectacular, really.
They use that in cinema and filmmaking as well, don't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when they're taking, they've got one for the moon, so that when they're taking the shot looking down the street and they want the moon there, rather than mess about with a computer, they can actually just look up and say, right, we have to do it on these days. We've got this week where we can do it, and we'll get and between the hours of, and they'll go and take it. They can work it out. So you can work out, if you want to take the photo down the lane with the sun straight down, you can actually work out what time on which days the sun will be at that spot and line it up. Also, if you want to do the star charts and you want to set up the camera, leave the shutter open and get star trails, so you need to know where south is and get the star trail down the road to where you're going or above the house where you are or something like that, you can calculate all that. So preparation is key with taking photography, and some of these apps are spectacular. They are really amazing. In fact, one of the best people at doing it is based over in Perth and at one of the universities there, and runs a public competition, display and exhibition out of Perth, and there is a move to try and extend that into all the mainland capitals, because there's plenty of cameras around and there's a lot of people look out at night and go and take some photos. Well, they're taking photos, they've got a place to put the photos rather than sitting in a hard drive somewhere. Calculator, equation of time, slider there, so it's set there for the 26th of April. It's a little bit late, I'm sorry about that. It's 11 o'clock, I should have had it set at there. But anyway, that's for today at this location, and that's how many hours of sunshine we had today, 10.6 hours. And that's a sine curve, if you know any or recall any mathematics, but without mentioning sine curve, all of a sudden you're dealing with them. And so it's a matter of get on with it and use it rather than get too caught up with where it came from. And of course, it's got something to do with the sun going around in the sky, or the Earth going around the sun, or one of those relative movement things. Meanwhile, when we talk about solar panels, you can optimise your solar panel. How do you mount it on the roof? Most people put it at a certain angle, or depending on your roof, just bolt it straight to the roof. In fact, there's a new building material announced last week that's going to combine the roof and the solar panel, which makes a lot of sense, because why have a roof and then put a solar panel on it? It's a double layer, completely unnecessary. And so basically that's what's going to happen from now on. Vancouver's just passed a law saying every building will have solar panels on it from a certain date. Right, 100% of buildings will have solar panels, that's it. Get on with it. So it's all very interesting. This particular graph comes from a Western Canada project called the Sun Mine. They had a coal mine, it closed, uneconomic, and they were going to rehabilitate it, and they said, well, actually it's south facing. Here in Melbourne we talk about north facing. In Canada they talk about south facing. So let's not rehabilitate it, let's put solar panels on it. So they spent $2 million to put solar panels on the thing. It's generating $10 million worth of electricity a year. It's called Sun Mine, and it's in Kimberley. And they put this together to look at which is the best way to mount the solar panels. So you can have it fixed, that is just at an angle, and leave it there. You can have it horizontal, basically put it on the ground and have it facing up. That's interesting. You can have it polar, so it actually rotates in a north, so it's got a north thing, so it rotates around north. So for us it rotates around south, so it starts in the morning in the east and goes around to north and then around to the west during the day, and then resets itself in the morning and then it just rotates at that fixed angle all day. And you think, well, that'd be more efficient than just having it fixed facing that way, because in the east it's that way at an angle. So the engineer logic would say, yeah, you want it to follow the sun. And then, of course, the sun's moving higher and lower, or the Earth's rotating, so it seems to be higher and lower during the year. So it'd be good if you could tilt it up in summer and tilt it down in winter. So you're going to move it that way, then move it that way. And that's what that full green one is on the side there. And so you've got sliders there to see the difference. And it turns out, with the modern panels, there's not much difference. Probably 15% maybe. But the cost of having something tracking, full tracking, is absolutely enormous. The wear and tear on the bearings, the motors, the trackers. The Japanese have got a really good thing. They're putting, on all their water storages, they're putting floating solar panels because they don't have to support them. They just have them floating, and then it's really easy to turn them. So it's in big circular things on their water storages. And you think, oh, that's a good idea. But then you think, well, wait a minute, you've got a lot of electricity out there, and a lot of water, a lot of, anyway. So there's 5 mounting systems. The question is, which is the best, and what does the best mean anyway? Is the best the cheapest? Is the best the highest yield? What is it? So there's the 5 pictures, and then there's the 2 graphs. So winter is the little graph, and summer is the big graph. You can see in winter, there's hardly any difference between all of them. And in summer, there's a huge difference between all of them. But then the question is, do you need that much power in summer unless you can store it? And if you can't, it's just going to overload your grid. In fact, it'll blow up your grid, which is what the problem is with Melbourne at the moment. We've got too many solar panels on one side of town. Or, sorry, not on one side of town at all, sorry, take that back. On the outskirts of town, if you look at how the solar panels have gone into Melbourne, it's like a donut. It's right around the outer suburbs. All the big houses with roofs that were being hit with the power bills. Inner city, little houses, little roofs, probably don't use much power anyway because it's a brick house and well insulated. How about that? So just that study alone is amazing to see who's got the solar panels. So ATSI and Stella, we've got solar and wind available at the moment, and in development, my next project is household efficiency, looking at installations and using devices, and do you turn things off? Been a huge debate the last few weeks about turning off your computer when it's fully charged, because the charger will use electricity when it's disconnected. Now, take this opportunity to say with Apple, just leave them plugged in. There is so little draw on these chargers, it's not worth the effort to go over and keep pulling it out. In fact, you probably have to replace the plug before you have to, and it'll cost a lot more than the money you've saved. So it might cost you 2 cents a year for the electricity that your iPad charger is using when you've disconnected your iPad. And the test for any of them is, if it's warm to touch, when there's nothing plugged into it, then it's an old style transformer and it is costing you money. The new style hardly has any consumption at all, and the way to test is just put it in your hands and feel if it's warm, then it probably should be on a power board that's got a timer that switches itself off. All the old rechargers were a bit like that. They just use a very simple transformer. The Sphero chargers get quite warm, so you turn them off. Not very efficient. How big Stella? Well, Stella just last term, so a couple of weeks ago, celebrated the 500th school, so it's well into up towards 510 now across Australia, so 45,000 students at an estimate. Most schools you talk to have got this stuff going and looking for more of it. So it's interesting. Primary schools, secondary schools, across the board. Government, independent, Catholic. So there's no distinction in that regard at all. It comes down to what sort of education are the teachers designing for that particular school. And overwhelmingly, we've spotted 500 of them that want this project-based, open-ended, investigation, hands-on creating. And so we're encouraging the people who are already at that end of the graph. The people at the other end of the graph, they'll talk to someone and hear about it, and they might come along to something and say, oh yeah, I might give it that a bit of a go. I could do a lesson on that next week. And that might be as far as they go. Next year they might do 2 lessons or 20 minutes. But it's a matter of horse to water and all that sort of thing. We can't make anybody do anything. All we can do is encourage. And so the ADEs around the place, their sole purpose is to be good at what they do, be good at something, have some stories, a little bit like tonight, a few stories, show you what the sort of things I do. If it's of interest, you can have a chat. If it's not, well, thanks for your time. And maybe tell someone else about it because they might be interested. And so it's just that networking and valuing that everybody's good at something. It's just a question of what is it and how good can you get, because you can always get better. So what is it that would take to assist you to improve? And if it's only a bit of technology, because most of those little robots are about, I don't know, $200, $150, we'll find a fund somewhere to buy a few, that's all right. But it's a question of what you do with the thing, not have you got the thing. And the same with the tablets. If you've got an Android tablet, well, let's use it. Let's see what it can do. And we'll soon get to its limits or break it or something, and we'll get one that does some really good things as well. But basically you use what you've got until you outrun it. And so if you haven't got many things, well, you work around it. Stella and ATSI, well, ATSI is funded, so yeah, this project is funded by Orica. It's being exported to Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia. I think UAE is also interested. UAE's discovered that their curriculum is very good on fossil fuel energy, not so good on renewable energy. So they need to get some renewable energy quickly, but they also like the engineering. So they've seen our gear at some of the conferences and they said that'll do, and they're prepared to buy it off the shelf. So ATSI had to work out what it's worth, and I think they're going to sell it to them for about $2 million. But user pays. What we do is we create usable documents in a Word format. The schools sign on, and what they're signing on for is that their teachers will come to a two-day professional learning experience, receive the equipment, and it's a huge amount of equipment, not for a whole classroom, and take that back, and their obligation is that they must train at least 5 other teachers and invite us into the school to celebrate that they've had themselves and 5 other teachers take it on. So it's an improvement model, not a buy it and sit in a cupboard model. You've got to actually use the stuff. And what we then do is we tell the neighbouring schools that you've got it and they'll come and borrow it. So that's okay. A lot of the primary schools don't want to buy it. So it's a cost recovery basis. So the basic thing with STEM, if you're not making, it's not STEM. You can talk about it, you can use a computer, you can be clever with a computer, but what are you actually doing? What are you making that didn't exist before? So in the art, there's a lot of argument about STEAM, where they want to put art in. That makes a lot of sense in primary school, because in art classes, that's where they make things. That's where all the fabrics and design take place. So it makes a lot of sense to call it STEAM in a primary school. And then it's a question of, right, get on with it. What do you want to do? Now, there's huge opportunity for interested others in local primary schools. So if you're somehow connected with children, given some of your vast experience with these things, and it can be online. That is, they ask some questions on Monday, Tuesday, and you just say that by next Monday, Tuesday, you will have a look at it and you might have a conversation or provide some answers. So if you're like, you're the expert online, where they've got someone to ask about stuff, or maybe even be invited in. So there's a whole issue about adults off campus coming on campus, but once that's sorted out, it's a real resource that's not used in schools. There's a huge wealth of knowledge beyond the school that's probably available during the day, and it's just sheerly the ability to organise the contact that it doesn't happen. Some schools do the community outreach thing really well. Others don't know how to do it, so they sort of get stuck. So I just mentioned it to you that maybe there's a local school, maybe they're interested, and the condition is that they ask questions. You're not there to tell them what to do. Their job is to ask questions and you'll provide questions back. So you'll question their question. Because that's the best way to learn something, is not be told, be asked. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Encourage comments and further comment. I'm on list and happy to talk off list at any time.
Mike.
2 questions, Gary, related. What age do we start children off at? You've talked about secondary and primary. What about early
when they're
years?
interested. If they're asking questions, they're ready.
Have you had any experience with early years?
Well, my son, who's now just graduated as an honours engineer from Flinders Uni, started pulling things apart when he was 2 and continued all the way through, and his sister, when she was 4, went to the shed and got out the spanner and took the trainer wheels off her bike because she wanted to have a real bike like her brother. So it's really just about why not, given the opportunity. And so for children, it's really opportunity. They've got to be safe, of course, but there's plenty they can do. And what we do with a lot of these devices is we've removed a lot of that opportunity to invent things that aren't already pre-packaged. So it's that creator-consumer difference. It's a dichotomy that we've got to deal with. I missed the memo that told teachers that they are consumers now, consumer educators rather than citizen creator educators. So I missed that, so I'm still catching up.
And the second question relates to any experience of this in developing countries?
Again, patchy like us. Here in Melbourne, you can find some brilliant examples of 1960s classrooms with chalk. Or you can find the best practice 21st century learning open common. Out here is a classroom. That makerspace down the end is a classroom. Some of the local schools come here as their makerspace classroom, and it's just spectacular. And they're all doing different things, and they're away, and they're only here for an hour and they want to stay for 3. So in developing countries, it comes down to skipping that textbook stage of the answers in the textbook, and there's one answer. I'm retrofitting a lot of textbooks with a thing called Orasma, and so you place a trigger image from the textbook, and so when they get their iPad, they face it at the textbook and they get a movie, or they get a menu choice of different movies they could watch related to what they've just read in the textbook. So retrofitting existing documents. So you don't have to reinvent things, you can just adapt things. So in developing countries, same as here, it depends. Some people are ready to go, others having trouble. One of my colleagues, this is being recorded, isn't it? One of my colleagues in a recent school arrived from a syllabus-driven curriculum. So he was at a senior school with a syllabus, and that tells you on the day, almost to the minute, what it is you'll be doing. And here's the answers to the worksheets you've handed out that will be handed in about 12 and a half minutes. And the class has 40 students in it, and they take the shoes off at the door, they sit down, they work solid, they get up and they leave. Come to Melbourne, downtown Melbourne, and they find the classrooms somewhat different. We have a thing called a study design, which allows each teacher to choose appropriate activities and technologies according to interest and ability and availability. And so here in Melbourne, you can go from places that are sticky tape, string and scissors through to everything connected. They don't get their hands dirty. Now, in a developing country, are we in the big city with the school that the head politicians' children go to, or are we out in the suburbs with the masses, or are we out in the rural settings where they're never going to be in a city. So the educators that are going into those places are picking that innovator edge. So when we've gone to Philippines, it's a matter of trying to get it into as many schools as possible within the local conditions, without telling them what to do. It's a sovereign country, you can't walk in and start being the expert.
Funding the program
Correct.
to date.
Now, a little bit of a letdown is this is counted as foreign aid in Australia. So when they talk about the foreign aid budget, this is counted in it.
So are Orica prepared to fund overseas? Are they?
Yeah, sure. They've got mines in all these places. And it's all part of, they've got the mine there, and part of the contract with the government is that they've got to look after the education of the surrounding area. So it's part of the deal, is that they've displaced some of these people with the mines, so they have to, in kind, put back. So, like, they're building villages and they're building schools and they're providing curriculum resource of which some of this is available as appropriate. I mean, we can't import Victorian curriculum into somewhere else. So it's, a ball of string, follow the end and you don't know where it goes round and round and round. You don't know. There's no one place. There's no start. There's no end. As an educator point of view, you see an opportunity and the motivation is to improve the situation for that learner in front of you, be it an adult or be it younger school age. And the politics and the cost factor is a consideration, but once you're in action, it's irrelevant. It's a matter of what is the learning opportunity.
So can we get you overseas, or can we get you to train some?
No, there are hundreds of us already there, hundreds and hundreds. In fact, one of the success stories of the school closures in Victoria in the early 90s was that about 300 displaced teachers from Victoria ended up going to New York and setting up a substitute teacher company. And they used to go into the hardest to staff schools because the teachers were sick that day and they needed a teacher, so they went in as a substitute. And so they've basically taken the 80s curriculum from here and transplanted it to there. And funnily enough, it works really well. And the irony was that both Chris Pine and Julie Gillard came back from New York and said, this program in New York is fantastic, we should bring it to Australia. And people down in Melbourne that knew anything about it just smiled and said, we've been trying to talk to Sydney for 30 years, but they wouldn't listen. But it went to New York and it's come back and now they're listening. So the way to interpret any headline you read about education is that they're talking about Sydney. And if you do that, then you won't get so upset about it. So yeah, well, Sydney's like that. New South Wales has a syllabus. They tell them what to do, when to do it, and there's actually penalties if they go beyond what's being done at that level and go into next year's content. You're not allowed to do that. Whereas here in Victoria, you follow your interest. Away you go.
I'm interested in contacting whoever wants help. I've got 45 years of electronics design, programming, in particular logic, Boolean expressions. And when I explain to people how that works, they're amazed they can now solve complex problems. And I'd love to talk to people about that.
Well, there's these things called maker spaces that are starting to set up around the place. So one avenue might be even to talk to the people up the end here because they'll know the network.
Right. Yep.
And it's like a shed. Right? So there used to be these men's sheds set up around the place which had a different purpose and function, but they're not unlike that in that there are oasis of building stuff with a 3D printer over there and a laser cutter over there, and people talking earnestly about what they're going to do next and on computers designing things, or making a circuit board or fixing something. And there's increasing numbers of them. At the moment, I think there's probably 8 or 10. There was a Makerspace exhibition out at Knox the week before Easter, and they had over 1,000 people go to it. So the displays of people that had makerspaces and other people that thought they had some product they want to sell. It's like a craft market, if you like. but a large number of people actually went there to engage and see what's going on. So there's all those sorts of key people around. I've got a bit of a list if you're interested, we can talk about that. And it's really, you find them where they are. You know, it could be a local primary school, it could be next door neighbours, kids go to that school and they're sort of interested. It depends a little bit on personal chemistry. You know, do you get along with who you're going to talk to at the school? Or are you better off in a adult education or there's a couple of alternative settings around the place where kids are a bit disengaged or they can't see the point, but they're pretty smart. And if you just talk to them as adults, they'll build things. They're good.
Any other questions? Well, again, thank you very much, Gary. I wasn't going to say very much, but congratulations. It was a fantastic talk. It's not difficult to see why Gary's picked up a few awards along the way, is it, for the work that he's done. So again, can we put our hands together and thank Gary for tonight?
Well done. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Next month?
Oh, next month I've mentioned.
Microphone.
Sorry. Can I use this? Again, next month, Robert Black, who is combining graphics, cartooning and FileMaker Pro, which is a rather intriguing mix. So you'll have to come along next month and hear about it.